Evelyn Carter had spent 15 years cleaning other people's messes, but one fateful evening, after years of silence, she realized the true mess was her own life. A life stripped of dignity, trust, and love. The invitation to her son's lavish birthday party would ignite a fire in her she hadn't felt in years. Now she was ready to fight, not just for her family, but for the woman she had buried long ago. Evelyn Carter's life was once defined by her family. She was a young woman when she met Thomas Carter, a well-dressed financial advisor with a smooth charm. He was 10 years older, but to Evelyn, he was everything she needed. At 19, she was working as a waitress while attending community college. The future felt uncertain, but Thomas's proposal promised to change all of that. They married quickly, and Evelyn, eager for stability, fully committed herself to her new role as a wife. Over the years, she devoted herself entirely to her family. They had 2 children, Brandon and Sophie, and Evelyn found herself in the role of caretaker, organizer, and the backbone of their household. She cooked, cleaned, ran errands, and managed every aspect of the home. It was her full-time job, and she was good at it. She was the woman who held the household together, who took care of everything, making sure things ran like clockwork. Her life revolved around the needs of her husband and children. Every day was spent prioritizing their happiness, their well-being, and their success. But in all of this, Evelyn set aside her own dreams. She had always dreamed of finishing school, working in nonprofit advocacy, and doing something meaningful for herself. But those dreams faded into the background as she gave everything she had to her family. Thomas appreciated her efforts, or so she thought. At least, that was how it seemed at the time. But in reality, Evelyn was slowly losing herself in the process. Years passed, and life seemed stable. Brandon went off to UCLA on a scholarship, and Sophie followed her own path in Chicago. Evelyn became used to the absence of her children, who were growing more independent and focused on their own lives. She felt proud of their accomplishments, but at the same time, a part of her felt invisible. She was no longer the center of their world, as she had once been. It didn't bother her at first. After all, she had sacrificed so much for them. They were doing well, and that was all that mattered. But in the back of her mind, Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that she had become somewhat invisible, a ghost in the family. In this quiet acceptance of her new role, Evelyn began to lose sight of herself. She had no career of her own to speak of, no degree, and no job outside of the home. She was entirely dependent on her husband's success. But what she hadn't realized was that this dependence was exactly what made her vulnerable. Thomas had always been the breadwinner, the one who made the financial decisions. He was the one who brought in the money and controlled the family's wealth. Evelyn, in her role as a wife and mother, had trusted him completely. She had let him handle the money while she focused on the children and the household. But this trust would come back to haunt her, and she would soon learn that Thomas's financial decisions were not as secure as she thought. Evelyn had given everything to her family, and in return, she believed that they would always support her, especially when she needed it most. But as she would soon discover, everything she had built, her family, her role, and her security, was about to crumble in a way she never could have anticipated. The life she had worked so hard to maintain would fall apart, and Evelyn would be left standing in the ruins, wondering how she got there. It had been years since Evelyn had been invited to one of Brandon's celebrations. He had been busy with his life, focusing on his career and the high-powered world of business. His birthday parties were always extravagant, held in faraway places like Aspen or Cabo, where only the wealthiest could afford to attend. Evelyn never expected an invitation. She would send a card, a small gift, and that would be the extent of her involvement. But this time, something was different. One day, Evelyn received a text from Brandon. The message was short and simple. "Mom, I'm hosting a dinner party for my birthday next weekend. Can you come Saturday at 7 o'clock? Evelyn blinked, unsure whether she had read it correctly. For years, her son had barely acknowledged her presence at these events, always busy with his own life. And now suddenly he was inviting her. Evelyn was thrilled, but also apprehensive. Was it genuine, or was this simply a formality? Without hesitation, Evelyn replied, "I'd love to. What should I bring?" It felt like an invitation to something new, a chance to reconnect with her son, perhaps even with the version of herself she had left behind. Brandon's response was even simpler. "Just yourself." As the date of the party approached, Evelyn found herself worrying about the details. What would she wear? How should she act? Her wardrobe was modest, and she didn't own anything fancy. She decided on a simple black dress, one she had worn to a funeral many years ago. It was the nicest thing she owned. She had her hair trimmed and styled at the mall, something basic but neat. She even bought a small gift, a silver picture frame she had found at a vintage shop. Inside, she placed a photo of Brandon as a boy, building sandcastles at the beach. It was a reminder of the happier times, when everything seemed simpler. Evelyn spent the entire week in a state of nervous anticipation. She wasn't sure what to expect when she arrived at Brandon's house. She had seen photos of the place online, a sleek, modern mansion in the Hollywood Hills, with floor-to-ceiling windows and million-dollar views. It was the kind of house Evelyn had cleaned for clients, but had never stepped into as a guest. When the day finally arrived, Evelyn set off for the party. She took the bus as far as she could and then called a rideshare to take her the rest of the way. The driver eyed her curiously as they passed rows of luxury homes, each more extravagant than the last. She tried to relax, but a feeling of unease crept over her. When the driver asked if it was a big party, Evelyn smiled and replied softly, "It's my son's birthday. He lives here." As they drove up the winding roads of the Hollywood Hills, Evelyn felt like an outsider, a small speck in a world of wealth and privilege. The house stood before her, even grander than the pictures she had seen. It was everything she had imagined, polished, sleek, and modern. The circular driveway was filled with expensive cars, and she suddenly felt incredibly small. She had spent most of her life cleaning other people's luxury homes, but this was different. This time, she was the one walking into it, unsure of where she fit in. When the door swung open, Brandon stood in the doorway, looking like the successful man he had become. He was tall and poised, dressed in a navy suit that made him look like his father. "Mom," he said, his voice unreadable, "you made it." Evelyn stepped forward to hug him, but he didn't return the gesture. Instead, he moved aside and motioned for her to come in. "Everyone's out by the pool," he said, his tone distant. The word everyone rang in Evelyn's ears. She suddenly felt the weight of the situation. She wasn't just going to a small family dinner. She was walking into a world she didn't know, a world where she wasn't sure if she belonged. As Evelyn stepped inside Brandon's house, she immediately felt like a fish out of water. The modern furniture, abstract art on the walls, and marble floors were all things she had seen before in the homes of wealthy clients. But this wasn't a house she was cleaning. This was Brandon's home, the home he had built with his wife, Amber, in the heart of Hollywood. Evelyn had never stepped into a place like this as a guest. She felt like an intruder, someone who didn't quite belong. She followed Brandon past the polished marble floors and up the glass staircase, each step feeling like it took her further away from the life she had known. Everything in this house was perfect, too perfect. The furniture was sleek, the lighting was carefully arranged, and the view from the large windows was breathtaking. The city of Los Angeles stretched out before her, glittering like a postcard. But as beautiful as it was, Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that she didn't belong here. Brandon led her to the back, where a large infinity pool sparkled under the night sky. The backyard was filled with guests, all dressed in sleek cocktail attire, sipping champagne and laughing. The whole scene felt like something out of a movie, a world so far removed from Evelyn's modest apartment and the simple life she had built for herself. She stood at the edge of the terrace, gripping her small gift bag tightly, unsure of where to go or what to do. Amber, Brandon's wife, spotted her across the pool and waved. She looked just as elegant as Evelyn had imagined. Her red designer dress fit perfectly, and she moved through the crowd with ease. "Evelyn, what a surprise," Amber said, kissing Evelyn's cheek lightly. Evelyn smiled politely, but felt a knot tighten in her stomach. "A surprise?" she asked, unsure of how to respond. Amber's smile tightened just a little. "Of course he told you I was coming." Brandon had invited her, but he had never mentioned his wife's reaction or the awkwardness she would feel walking into such an unfamiliar setting. Evelyn felt the distance between herself and her children growing wider, and in that moment, the reality of her situation hit her. She wasn't just out of place in this fancy house. She was out of place in her own family. As Evelyn moved through the house, she couldn't help but reflect on her life with Thomas, the man who had once been her partner, her support, and the father of her children. She followed Brandon, feeling like an outsider in his world, through rooms adorned with sleek furniture and expensive art. The house was a testament to their success, but it also reminded Evelyn of everything she had lost. Her heart ached as she passed through rooms that felt more like a museum than a home. The polished marble floors, the glass staircases, and the modern decor felt cold, distant, nothing like the warm, lived-in house she had once kept. She thought back to the early years of her marriage, when she had met Thomas at 19, working as a waitress and dreaming of a better future. He had seemed like a prince in shining armor, offering her the life she had always dreamed of: a stable home, children, a future. The early years had been happy. Evelyn worked hard to make their home a haven, caring for their children, running the household, and supporting Thomas in his career. She had sacrificed her own dreams, putting her aspirations of finishing school and pursuing a career on hold. She was content, or so she thought. But over time, things began to change. Thomas became more focused on his career, spending long hours at the office, while Evelyn continued to care for the children and the house. She had been so absorbed in making sure everything ran smoothly at home that she failed to notice the cracks in their marriage. She had believed that Thomas appreciated her, that he valued her sacrifices, but she had been wrong. When Thomas walked in one afternoon and told her he was leaving, Evelyn was blindsided. He said there was someone else, someone younger, someone who made him feel alive again. The words hit Evelyn like a punch to the gut. The man she had built her life around, the man she had supported for so many years, was walking away. And not just from her, but from their entire family. The divorce was brutal. Thomas had a high-priced lawyer who made sure to protect his wealth, while Evelyn's lawyer was a low-cost referral. She didn't stand a chance. The settlement was a shadow of what she had expected, leaving her with barely enough to get by. The child support payments barely covered groceries, and the alimony was gone before she had a chance to breathe. Evelyn was left with nothing but memories, debts, and the overwhelming feeling of betrayal. Her children, too, had been hurt by the divorce. Sophie blamed Evelyn for driving their father away, even telling her, "You let yourself go." No wonder he left. Evelyn was stunned by Sophie's words, but she had no way to argue. She hadn't let herself go. She had simply given everything for her family, and in the end, it wasn't enough. Her children blamed her for Thomas's departure, and in their eyes, she had failed them. After the divorce, Evelyn was forced to start over. She found a job cleaning houses through an agency. The work was hard, the hours long, but it paid enough to keep her and her children in the school district. Over time, she built up a list of private clients, some of whom were people she had once known, women who had been her friends when she was married to Thomas. But now they barely acknowledged her. They left lists of tasks on marble countertops and referred to her by her last name, like she was just another employee. Evelyn was no longer the woman she had once been. She wasn't Mrs. Thomas Carter anymore. She was just Alan, the help. Brandon and Sophie had gone on to build their own successful lives. Brandon went to UCLA on a scholarship, and Sophie attended a private marketing school in Chicago. Both of them married well and had careers of their own. They were proud of their accomplishments, but they had drifted further and further away from Evelyn. They rarely called unless they needed something. In many ways, Evelyn had become invisible to them. They were too busy with their own lives to acknowledge the woman who had sacrificed so much for them. Now, as she stood in the backyard of Brandon's luxurious home, surrounded by people who didn't know her, Evelyn couldn't help but feel like a ghost. She had worked so hard to hold her family together, to create a life for her children, but in the end, she was just a memory to them. No one seemed to care about the sacrifices she had made or the pain she had endured. She was just the woman who cleaned houses now, the woman who didn't fit into their perfect lives. The sound of laughter and clinking glasses from the poolside felt hollow to Evelyn, like a distant echo of the life she had once had. She stood at the edge of the terrace, clutching the small gift she had brought for Brandon, unsure of where to go or what to do. Amber, Brandon's wife, waved from across the pool, but Evelyn's heart sank. Amber was perfect, beautiful, and confident. She fit in this world. Evelyn did not. And yet, despite everything, Evelyn realized she had no choice but to continue. She had given up everything for her family, and now, as she stood there, it became clear to her she had nothing left to lose. She had been silent for too long, and it was time to stop living in the shadow of the life she had lost. She had to reclaim her voice. She had to reclaim herself. The party felt like a dream. The laughter, the clinking of champagne glasses, and the sleek cocktail attire were all part of a world that felt foreign to Evelyn. She had always worked in the background, taking care of others while her family thrived. But now she stood alone on the edge of the party, unsure of her place. She wasn't sure whether to engage with the guests or retreat into the shadows. Brandon came over, his expression unreadable. He handed her a glass of wine and gestured for her to join the others by the pool. But Evelyn felt her anxiety growing. She didn't belong here. She didn't belong in this world of wealth and perfection. The house, the guests, the whole scene, everything felt like a reminder of how far she had fallen. As the night wore on, Evelyn began to feel more and more like an outsider. She searched the crowd for Sophie, but her daughter was nowhere to be seen. Sophie had canceled their last 3 lunch dates, citing work or a last-minute cold. Evelyn tried to brush it off, but the feeling of rejection lingered. It was then that the conversation turned to a subject Evelyn hadn't expected. One of Brandon's friends, a young man who had been chatting with Brandon, turned to her with a curious expression. "So you've been cleaning houses for a while, right?" he asked, his tone casual. "What's it like working for the rich and famous?" Before Evelyn could respond, Brandon interjected. "She doesn't clean for celebrities or anything," he said quickly, trying to downplay his mother's work. "Just regular houses." The words hit Evelyn like a slap in the face. She had spent years building a successful cleaning business, working for well-known clients, some of whom had been celebrities. But Brandon's dismissive tone made her feel small, insignificant. She swallowed her hurt and responded, "Actually, many of my clients are fairly well known. I've been in more Hollywood homes than some executives." Brandon's face darkened, and his friend laughed awkwardly, but Evelyn wasn't finished. She felt something inside her snap. "I clean," she said firmly, "because when your father left us with nothing, I had to find a way to keep you and your sister in school. I clean because it let me be present when you needed me. I clean because it's honest work, and I do it well." The silence that followed was thick and uncomfortable. Brandon looked away, and his friends shifted uncomfortably. Evelyn could feel her heart pounding in her chest, but she stood her ground. "Can we not do this now?" Brandon hissed, clearly embarrassed. "It's my birthday." Evelyn's eyes locked with his, and she knew, with painful clarity, that their relationship had changed forever. She wasn't the woman she used to be. She wasn't just his mother anymore. She was a reminder of everything he had left behind, a relic of a past he wanted to forget. "I've felt unwelcome since I walked in the door," Evelyn said quietly. She turned and walked past the infinity pool, past the guests who had been laughing moments before, and out of the house without looking back. No one tried to stop her. Outside, Evelyn stood on the sidewalk, clutching her purse tightly as the city stretched out before her. The lights of Los Angeles twinkled in the distance, but they didn't offer her warmth. She felt cold, but also strangely liberated. For the first time in years, Evelyn was making a choice for herself. She wasn't going to stay silent anymore. That night, Evelyn realized that she had been living in the shadow of her past for too long. She had let her family define her, and it had cost her everything. But now she was ready to take back control of her life. The fight for her dignity had only just begun. Evelyn knew, deep down, that the life she had been living was no longer enough. For years, she had stayed silent, held captive by the secrets of her past and the unfair burdens placed on her. But after leaving Brandon's party, she realized something crucial. Her silence had only served to protect the people who had wronged her. She had spent 15 years hiding behind the facade of the perfect wife and mother, but it was time to shatter that illusion. As Evelyn sat quietly in her modest apartment that evening, nursing a glass of wine, she thought about the years of sacrifices she had made for her family. Sacrifices that had gone unappreciated. Her children, who she had poured everything into, had distanced themselves. They were now part of a world she didn't recognize, a world where she no longer fit in. And her ex-husband, Thomas, had moved on to a new life, leaving her behind with nothing but a broken heart and financial ruin. But then there was something else, something that Evelyn had kept buried for far too long. Lawrence Worthington, Thomas's former business partner. Evelyn remembered him well. Before everything fell apart, Thomas and Worthington had built a successful financial firm together. When the federal investigations began to circle around them, Thomas had thrown Worthington under the bus to protect himself. Worthington had been left to face the fallout alone, while Thomas had walked away with his wealth and reputation intact. Worthington had reached out to Evelyn years ago after the divorce. He had quietly told her that he had evidence, proof that Thomas had hidden millions of dollars in offshore accounts during their marriage, money that he should have disclosed in the settlement. At the time, Evelyn had been too afraid to act. She had been focused on protecting her children, on keeping the family together, and on trying to maintain some semblance of peace. But now, after everything that had happened, she could no longer keep quiet. She had spent too long living in the shadow of Thomas's lies. Now it was time to expose the truth. That night, Evelyn made the call she had been putting off for years. She picked up her phone and dialed the number she had memorized so long ago. It was a number she had hoped she would never need, but now it felt like the only option. When the phone rang, her heart raced, and she held her breath as the line connected. "Mr. Worthington," Evelyn said, her voice steady but tinged with emotion. "It's Evelyn Carter. I think it's time we had that conversation." There was a brief pause on the other end, and then Worthington's voice, low and calm, responded. "Come by my office tomorrow morning," he said. "We'll discuss it then." The next morning, Evelyn made her way to Worthington's office. She had never been in a place like it. Polished wood furniture, leather chairs, and a view of the city that looked like something out of a movie. It was clear that Worthington had never faced the same financial struggles Evelyn had. He was still living in the world of success and power, the kind of world she had once been a part of before everything fell apart. When Worthington slid the thick folder across the table, Evelyn felt a wave of dread wash over her. She knew what it contained: proof, evidence of Thomas's deception. She took a deep breath and opened the folder. Inside were wire transfers, shell companies, and statements from banks she had never heard of. And there it was, $7 million, hidden away in accounts Thomas had failed to disclose during the divorce. This was money that Evelyn had been denied, money that could have changed everything for her and her children. "This is it," Worthington said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Everything you need to prove that Thomas Carter lied to you and hid assets from the divorce settlement." Evelyn closed the folder, her hands trembling slightly. She had been fighting for so long, but now it was clear. She wasn't just fighting for money, she was fighting for justice. For the years she had lost, for the dignity she had been denied, and for the woman she had buried deep inside herself. "I want justice," Evelyn said firmly. "Not just for me, but for the version of myself I buried 15 years ago." The next few days were a blur of meetings, phone calls, and paperwork. Evelyn found herself walking into offices she never thought she'd enter. Her world, once small and confined to cleaning houses and caring for her children, was now expanding into something much bigger. She was no longer the invisible woman in the background. She was stepping into the spotlight, ready to fight for what was rightfully hers. Evelyn met with Mitchell Crane, a high-powered attorney whose reputation preceded him. His office was located in a towering building with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Everything about the office screamed wealth, power, and success. But Evelyn wasn't intimidated. She had spent too many years living in the shadow of others to be afraid of these things now. Crane listened carefully as Evelyn explained her case, laying out the evidence of Thomas's fraud. When she handed him the folder full of documents, he took his time skimming through them, his expression growing more serious with every page he turned. "Mrs. Carter," he said finally, his voice low and deliberate, "you have a very strong case. Divorce fraud, especially in California, can reopen a settlement at any time if you can prove concealed assets, and you can prove it. If we move forward with this, you could be entitled to half the value of those accounts, plus penalties. And if we dig deeper, we might be able to claim a portion of everything he has acquired since the divorce: property, business equity, even the Malibu vacation home." Evelyn's heart skipped a beat. She had always assumed that she had lost everything in the divorce. But now she realized there was still hope. There was a chance to reclaim what had been taken from her, And this wasn't just about money. It was about reclaiming her life, her dignity, and her sense of self-worth. "I want all of it," Evelyn said, her voice steady. "Everything that was mine before he buried it." Crane gave her a knowing look. "Are you prepared for the fight? This won't be quiet. Thomas will fight back with everything he has. He's a powerful man, and he won't go down easily." Evelyn didn't hesitate. "I've spent 15 years cleaning other people's messes," she said, her tone sharp. "I'm not afraid of dirt." The decision to go public with the story was not an easy one. Evelyn had spent so many years protecting her family's image, keeping their secrets and avoiding the truth. But now the truth was the only thing that mattered. Evelyn partnered with Jessica Kwan, an investigative journalist for the Los Angeles Times, known for uncovering white-collar corruption. Jessica had been trying to expose the fraud surrounding Thomas's business for years, but the story had been buried. Now, with Evelyn's help, it would see the light of day. The investigation was thorough. Jessica spent weeks digging into the evidence, verifying the bank statements, interviewing former clients, and piecing together the web of lies Thomas had created. Evelyn had to wait, sometimes feeling as though time was standing still. But she knew the wait was necessary. The truth had to be revealed carefully, methodically. Finally, the article was ready. When it hit the newsstands, the impact was immediate. The headline read, "Former financial advisor hid millions from ex-wife during divorce, documents reveal." In the third paragraph, Evelyn's name was mentioned as the woman who had finally come forward with the truth. The fallout was swift and intense. Thomas's clients began pulling out of his firm, demanding answers. The firm issued a press release, but it was too late. The damage had already been done. Thomas's lawyers scrambled to try and suppress the story, but the truth had a life of its own. As the news spread, Evelyn's phone buzzed nonstop. Brandon called several times, leaving messages begging her to talk. Sophie sent texts saying that they needed to discuss what had happened. But Evelyn didn't respond. She had made her choice. The next day, Sophie showed up at Evelyn's apartment, her face flushed with worry. "Mom," she said, rushing in and giving her a tight hug. "Where have you been?" "We've been worried sick." Evelyn stood her ground. "I've been exactly where I needed to be." Sophie pushed past her into the apartment, scanning the small space as if she had never seen it before. "What happened?" she asked, her voice filled with confusion. "Brandon said you left his party and then disappeared. We didn't know what to think." Evelyn didn't answer right away. She let the silence settle between them before speaking. "Something did happen," she said quietly. "I woke up, and I realized I've been silent for far too long." Sophie blinked, her face flushed with surprise. "Is this about what Brandon said at the party?" she asked. "He didn't mean it?" Evelyn interrupted her gently but firmly. "No, Sophie, it's not just about that. It's about everything I've given up for you and Brandon. It's about how you've treated me, how you've abandoned me, and how I've let it all happen because I didn't want to rock the boat." Sophie opened her mouth to respond, but Evelyn cut her off. "I'm not apologizing for speaking the truth anymore. I've spent years protecting you both, sacrificing everything, and it wasn't enough. I'm done hiding." For the first time in years, Evelyn stood strong. Sophie had nothing to say. She was stunned, speechless, but Evelyn didn't wait for her to respond. She had said what needed to be said. As the weeks passed, the pressure on Thomas increased. His firm was in turmoil. Clients were pulling their money out, and his reputation was tarnished. Finally, his legal team contacted Evelyn's attorney, offering a settlement, $3 million, with the promise that everything would go away quietly. Evelyn laughed when she heard the offer. It was a joke. She didn't want their money. She wanted everything that had been taken from her. She wanted the truth to be known, and she wanted justice. "I want half of everything," she told her lawyer, plus 15 years' worth of lost dignity. The offer was on the table, but Evelyn wasn't interested in silence anymore. She was ready to fight for what was rightfully hers. Evelyn stood on her small balcony that night, looking out at the city that had always seemed so distant, but now it felt different. The city wasn't a symbol of what she had lost. It was a reflection of what she had gained. She had reclaimed her life, her dignity, and her voice. The world she had once been part of, her family, her marriage, was gone. But in its place, Evelyn had found something far more valuable: herself. She had stopped cleaning up other people's messes. Now she was standing tall in the middle of her own life, and for the first time in years, she felt at peace. The battle wasn't over, but Evelyn was ready for whatever came next. She had fought for justice, and no matter the outcome, she knew one thing for sure: she would never be silenced again.